o'clock, everybody. Just waiting for everybody to get ready. Kia ora tātou, welcome everybody to the Infrastructure Services Committee of Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. I'm going to start with the karakia. Tui ao ranga, tui ao raro, tui ao roto, tui ao waho. Tui ao he ringa tangata. Ka tau mai te au, ka tau mai te pau. Hau mai e, hui e, taiki e. We have one person speaking for public forum, and that's Mr. Michael Lee, and he'll be speaking on regarding traffic management. Mr. Lee, do you wish to? You got the timer up?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me here today. You councillors are destroying Dunedin with the madness of imported cones, excessive and temporary permanent barricades, unnecessary diversions everywhere. Until 5 or 10 years ago, Dunedin functioned well. Now everywhere you look, there's a new roundabout, more judder bars, further congestion, more permanent barricades, etc. Hundreds of millions and more in continually rising debt and more purposely made congestion than we had under Aaron Hawkins. This greenwashed, brainwashed climate ideology is closing down businesses in central Dunedin. Noel Lemmings, Specsavers, McDonald's in George Street doesn't open until 11 now. Nova downstairs in the Octagon, to name just a few. All business confidence is down in these mandated and restricted traffic flow areas. This council has sold out its ratepayers, our children and grandchildren's freedoms. Trying to go anywhere in town is a nightmare. Trying to get up Frederick Street, you are met with unnecessary cone obstacles before London Street and George Street intersections. Then trying to get back south from Knox, you get taken all the way to David Street in North Dunedin. St Andrews Street congestion's bad too. The latest permanent unnecessary judder bars outside Caversham School, Mornington roundabouts, unnecessary judder bars outside Octagon Boys, less parking, 7 unnecessary judder bars roundabouts on Maori Road, all contributing to further surrounding city congestion and purposely caused frustration on the Port Chalmers Ravensbourne Road obstacles. Our once user-friendly, easy accessible city is gone forever. Now we are told we have to have dangerous, stupid, woke, Maori language te reo signage that no one can even
Mr. Lee, I just
read or
remind
understand.
you, we have a standard we have to keep inside this
along with
building,
hundreds of millions of ratepayer debt on unused, oversized cycleways. $1 million a week on bad interest loan payments. This is crazy. The majority of average Dunedin ratepayers and struggling businesses are fed up paying for your unnecessary ideology around perceived climate change fears. We are fed up with your mandates to control forced on us, our children and grandchildren, into evil 15, 20-minute smart city concentration camps. You elected councillors should be standing up to central government.
Point of order.
Hang on a minute. Whoa. Stop.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Can Mr. Lee, can you just be quiet for a second? I'm just going to adjourn for a minute. I'm adjourning the meeting. Second, Councillor Fiso. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Everybody's back. I'll call the meeting back to order, and that is the end of public forum. We'll move on to apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Vandervis and an apology from Councillor Gilbert for early departure. So I move that the committee accepts apologies from the two councillors. Do I have a second to Councillor Ackland? Those in favour? Aye. Carried. Item 4, confirmation of agenda. I move that the committee confirms the agenda without additional alteration. Do I have a second to Councillor Weatherall? All those in favour? Carried. Declarations of interest. Has anybody got any changes to declarations? Oh, Mike.
Apologies, Mr. Chair, but I was put on the Dunedin Hospital build governance group last month.
I don't know if that's an apology or a confession at this point. Thank you very much. I move then that the committee amends the elected independent members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan for elected or independent members' interest. Do I have a second to Councillor Mayhem? All those in favour? Carried. Confirmation of minutes. So we're on page 16. I move. Do we have any comments on the minutes from that meeting? No. Then I move that the committee confirms the minutes of the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting held on the 16th of May 2023 as a correct record. Second to Councillor Wiley. All those in favour? Carried. Part A, reports, actions from resolutions of Infrastructure Services Committee meetings. That's on page 21. Do we have any questions to that item? I don't have any either, so I move that the committee notes the open action items from resolutions of Infrastructure Services Committee meetings. Councillor Mayhem, all those in, anybody wish to speak to it? All those in favour? Carried. Item number 8, Infrastructure Services Committee Forward Work Programme. It's on page 25. Do we have any questions to that? Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you. Just on the waste levy allocation, it's got there that a new waste strategy legislation is soon to be introduced by MFE. Having a look on the MFE website, it says that it may not be until 2025, which doesn't really seem soon to me. Either that or they haven't updated their website. Do we have a guideline?
I'll have to come back to you. I was led to believe it was the end of this year.
Yeah, the reading of it says we're expecting the draft bill to be introduced into the House in late 23 or early 24. Following this, there will be an opportunity for feedback during the select committee process. We aim to have the legislation enacted in 2025. Which, are we waiting for the enaction or just for it to be presented?
No, the intent is to understand what the bill says, and we may be able to progress that work earlier than the enactment, depending on what the bill says.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Mayor.
On the as far as waste futures is concerned, there's a report due in November, which is a fair way off. But at the moment, we have, according to newspaper reports, we've got quite a lot of recycling being shipped out of town. What's the recycling situation at the moment?
Our contractor, EnviroWaste Limited, has an agreement with a subcontractor, OGO Fibre, to sort recycling materials in Dunedin until the 1st of July of this year. At that point, they haven't reached an agreement for the rest, the next year, and so they are taking Dunedin's recycling, curbside collected recycling materials up to Timaru for sorting.
In the interim, and do you expect that to be resolved after the 1st of July?
No, I expect that that's what will be happening until Dunedin has built its own material recovery facility and can sort materials here in Dunedin.
What's your expected time frame for that?
So it's subject to a resource consent process, but expectation is to have that operational in 2025.
Do you think there's anything that can be done in the interim?
No, we don't have any contractual mechanism to insert ourselves between the two parties.
Thank you. In terms of, on the second page, page 28, we've got the waste levy allocation policy, but there's also a government waste minimisation fund. Do you know how much is available in that fund?
No, sorry, I don't have that detail.
Have the DCC ever made application to that fund? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check with Mr. Henderson with that, but I can check with him and get back to you.
Waste levy fund.
No, Westman's grants.
Oh, the Westminster fund, yeah.
That would be good.
So what I do know is that MFE, I don't know which grant, but they have funded or part funded the new bins for the new curbside delivery model.
Know who administers the waste minimisation fund, but it's quite possibly MFE. But my impression was that there was quite a lot of money available, but for substantive projects, it's okay. And one last thing, I've had several complaints to me about in terms of there's quite a lot of transport spend on some of the roads and things around the city, but in particular there's a speed bump along Caversham Valley Road. Has there been many, have you been getting complaints through CSA about that? It's just a temporary rubber one outside the school, but it's...
Is it in the item?
Well, it's to do with transport and, major projects around the city. Part of the major project around the city is work on safer streets and installation of roundabouts, temporary roundabouts and speed bumps. But that particular one is just a temporary one, I believe. So I have made some inquiries, but has there been any level of inquiry, any level of complaint about that one? Because it's about a 10k speed bump versus 25, as the sign says.
We don't have activity reports to cover this, I realise that, so I'm giving you a bit of leeway on this, but we can't just go and question the whole departments and infrastructure about everything they're doing, so you'd have to find an item in the item after this question. I'll let this one go through.
This is was the last question I've got, but it's to do with something that's quite recent. Anyway, just to know if are there any complaints? There may not be any.
So that speed bump was installed after significant lobbying from the community, and that was lobbying of staff and councillors. And since it's been installed, I'm not aware of any complaints. I'm only aware of praise for the city for putting it in after several requests over a number of months to have it installed.
Before we go to Councillor Barker, I'm just going to follow up on a question that the Mayor said about recycling, and I just want to clarify really because it relates to our future planning. At the moment we can't interject ourselves in the middle of the contract between OG and Enviro Waste. And that would be the case in the future if we ever did the same as we go forward with construction of the MRF, that if we run the MRF, the Material Recovery Facility, under a contract, then we may find ourselves in the same position again in the future. In as much as that's where this contract has put us.
It's
okay,
difficult.
Well, I'll back it off because I see everybody's shaking their heads.
My sense, if I may, is we would think about that. We would be a party to that contract, and we would write the contract differently. But in this case, we didn't have an ability to influence the contract.
We didn't foresee it coming, probably.
Yeah. So I would think that the contract would be framed differently.
Okay, it could be resolved at that level. Okay, thank you. Councillor Barker.
Just want to follow up on the waste levy allocation policy. The purpose of getting it into the work program was to be there in time for the 10-year plan, because I think there was possibly an extra $200,000 in there, and councillors wanted to understand the process of which this was allocated. So it says that the potential report is going to be coming in October. Is that timeline still valid?
Yeah, well, it's valid on the premise that they'll introduce the bill for first reading at the end of the year. And so we'll understand where they are, what the legislation is saying with respect to how the waste levy fund can be spent.
I'll just add to that. If the bill seems to be delayed, then we will bring something back to help inform the 10-year plan discussions.
So but there is current government policy about how the waste levy can be spent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I have one last question, which is, I have to confess after telling the Mayor not to get distracted away from this. It's not quite on this, but it is related to this, and that is the letter that we were supposed to have written to the Ministry of Environment asking about the waste levy to be imposed on clean-fill. Has that letter been sent, and has the reply come back?
Yeah, I believe so. I have to double check with Mr. Henderson, but it was a thanks for your feedback.
It'd be quite good if we could see that reply, please. Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Okay, then I move that the committee notes the Infrastructure Services Committee Forward Work Programme. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ackland, does anybody wish to speak to it? I'll just say one quick thing. As we've gone through this new structure and we don't have as much in the way of activity reports, councillors who are interested in activity reports will start using this particular section of the meeting more and more often, because it's more like the only place that can actually be brought up. And I just encourage that as we form these agendas that we get more activity reports in some areas back into some of the units. Okay, after that I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item number 9, Otago Harbour Shared Path Naming, Te Aka Otako. Can we have Mr. Drew and Ms. Benson? Thank you very much. Do you wish to speak to it at all?
No, we're happy to take it as read.
Okay, before we take questions, I just want to formally, the item only notes the receiving of the names. I want to formally thank Te Runaka Otako for the kind gift of the names. I view it as again, the moving forward on the partnership that we have agreed to, and I consider this to be a really particularly lovely outcome for that. So anyway, with that background, questions? Councillor Barker.
Just want to follow up on the next steps on number 14, where it says staff will proceed with preparing wayfinding, tourist signage and cultural narrative markers. Is there an overall signage strategy for the city that also encompasses Enterprise Dunedin and tourism signage?
I'm not aware of a DC. Sorry.
There is a signage policy, councillor, but we are looking to review that policy currently as it's quite out of date.
So is there a plan to look at all of the signage for visitors holistically?
Yes, we've developed an app and we're currently doing a stock take of current state signage around the peninsula. That might become broader, but at the moment we're just focused on current state. That'll inform some kind of future state signage that we'll work through over the coming months.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just a very small point, but an important one. I noticed in this report, Te Aka Otako has a hyphen between the two words, and I haven't seen that anywhere else. Which is the correct form? Can someone clarify that for me? No, I'm looking at the chair. I'm looking at the chair.
I think that's,
I can't.
That's been copied directly from the letter from Okaha, so I'm not sure.
Ms. Madam Bahari might be able to give us the expert.
Kia ora everyone, it's usually 2 macrons on it, but depending on the spelling, and there was another part about the spelling which I'd suggest going back to the authors, because these are probably linguistic conventions that I have know nothing about. Yeah.
And I did note that it was in the original form, there wasn't a hyphen, but I do think it's important to clarify that. My second question is around signage as well. I'm just wondering about time frame on that. What is the plan in terms of the time frame to do that work?
So the plan is to have that done and ready for the opening. Well, the opening for when the peninsula side is finished, sort of later next year.
You mean the peninsula side is finished to Portobello? Thank you, Mr. Drew. It's very important to be specific. Thank you.
Any more questions? Well, I don't have any more either. So I moved in that the committee notes the 3 names for the Otago Harbour shared path.
I'm putting it as thanks rather than notes.
Oh, you are putting as thanks?
I'll just get
Okay.
Give me 2 seconds.
Well, then I'll move a slightly different movement motion.
We'll tweak it, tweak it, tweak it.
Happy to second, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just get it up. We'll put the macrons and things in, just give us a sec. So this is all the 3 names.
What? That starts there, right? Ready to roll?
Yep.
Okay. I moved in that the committee thanks Te Runaka o Otago for the 3 names for the Otago Harbour shared path, Te Aka Otago for the whole Otago Harbour shared path area from Port Chalmers to Harrington Point, Te Aramoana for the North Trail, and Te Awa Otago for the Eastern Trail. Councillor Gary's indicated that she would like to second that. Does anybody wish to speak to this? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to add my comments as I did yesterday in the presence of Megan Potiki and acknowledge Tahu Potiki for the gift of the name and Megan for her work on the narrative. This is significant and a beautiful and gracious gift. But I want to also draw your attention, and I know it will cause a little eye rolling, but at the risk of doing that, I just want to note in the first point that the shared path is between Harrington Point and Port Chalmers. And that is an important point because one of the pieces that is unfunded actually is on the approach to the marae, and I find it quite ironic given the graciousness of mana whenua in relation to the reclamation and in the gifting of the name, that we're going to need to turn our attention to that and how that is going to be funded. And we know that there's a motion, a resolution before council that's been passed by council as a step towards that. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that at this point. And just want to note how beautiful the names are, what a gift it is. Thank you so much.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The development of Te Ara Moana is something I've been embedded and entrenched in for way longer than I wish to remember, actually. And I'm absolutely delighted with that particular name and the others. And I just remember over the years when we were in one of many, and I say we, many people were involved in trying to progress this project. When we were involved in many development, there was hiatus many times when we got very gloomy that things would never progress and there was no indication that things would. And I remember at the time we could only dream of having issues to discuss around fence heights and colours of things and type of wood used and width, etc., etc. And often talk of names would come up, but names are separate to the things I mentioned previously because this is a true gift, these names. And I can, and as others have done and will do, I can only thank Te Runaka o Otago for those gifts and beyond that, Tahu Potiki, and what a great another great way of remembering him. And I think somebody mentioned earlier, maybe in questions, that this also continues to firm up and hopefully a long and enduring partnership with Mana Whenua. So I thank them for the names, and I'm also encouraged by the 3 points in, I think it's number 11, around the narratives of signage, which will embed further the power and significance of these names. And I look forward to them appearing all the way around the harbour, Councillor Gary, to Kopatai Port Chalmers. So I have to say, when the names were announced, this little boy here from London, England, got my hair stood on end. So that's how much it means to me. So thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, I think these names are particularly appropriate and a welcome gift. And in particular, the synergy for Te Aro Moana, the synergy of the path leading to the community at the very end of that side of the harbour. And similarly, the Te Awa Octagon leading to the community in Marae at that end, that side of the pathway. And the metaphor that was traditionally used for Te Awa, of Te Awa, for the water path to the end of the harbour. So the river was used as a pathway. So the metaphor is that the harbour is actually a river upon which it's easy to travel from one end of the harbour to the other. So I think it's an appropriate metaphor and a tie back to a century-long history that is helpful for us to recognise that history that has gone before, and I think it will have synergy into the future. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday, Megan Portakey, when we were discussing the Heritage Action Plan, brought up about embedding Mana Whenua stories within the stories of our heritage of our city and making sure that we acknowledge that. So this is another step forward with the opening of Te Whakaehu, Te Puna Whakaehu yesterday. This is another great step forward. So we're doing very well. I brought up signage because I do want to make sure that when we are storytelling that we are looking at it from a holistic point of view and making sure that all of those stories are told throughout in a whole narrative. That's I'm hot on, that we actually have an overall signage strategy for telling the stories when our people, that is not only our visitors but also the people that live in here, can see those stories every day and relate to them. Any
other speakers? I've done it again and moved an item without speaking, so I'm going to use my right of reply to speak. I just want to basically echo everybody else's sentiments that have been said today. I think this is a great moment for the city in some respects. The interaction between us and the harbour, I think we all have a strong relationship with that body of water. It's always played an important role in the city for the almost 1,000 years that people have lived here. It's been the central component of travel up and down this region, which is good to see the name then transferring over to the cycleway. And I think it's again emblematic of where we are heading with our relationship with Mana Whenua and the city. That it will be a natural thing to ask the Runaka at Otako, for whom this is the Ruhoi, to name it. It seems the only appropriate thing, and I thank you very much again for the name. And there is so much history on that. I mean, partly when we were rebuilding the faces, the basalt faces were built by prisoners of war and political prisoners from Taranaki who were sent down here against their will. And it was very important in the heritage of rebuilding that site that those people and their passage was also remembered in a physical form by rebuilding those walls out the front again. So this cycleway or safety improvement or whatever else you want to call it has been an incredible, on the eastern side, an incredible change to the communication up and down the harbour, and on the western side bringing in a fantastic cycleway, and again very well appropriately named. So that's it from me and my right of reply. I'll now move it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 10, retail quarter update from the update reports. Mr. West, Dr. Hazelton, and Mr. Von Pine. Thank you. Do you want to say anything or just take it as read?
I think we'll take it as read, Mr. Chair, but I just wanted to remind members I did send an email out this morning with a slight correction to paragraphs 22 and 25.
Yeah, and we've been handed the corrections. Thank you. Any questions? I'll repeat that again. Any questions? Wow. Councillor Gary.
It's a question. Dr. Hazelton and Mr. Von Pine, what is the mood of the team currently, given it's coming in under budget and incredibly ahead of time? What is the mood of the team?
As always, there continues to be challenges out there on a day-to-day basis, but I think they're feeling quite buoyed by the fact that they are ahead of time. And many of the challenges, I guess, that we've faced earlier, now that we've been through them once, we kind of, with a block, we kind of know how to improve them for the next one. So I think there's a good will out there towards most of the staff. We still have some challenges out there, you know, as you'd understand, but yeah, I think that's a good.
Given the time we're in and the inflation crisis and cost of living crisis and so forth, for businesses it's a hard time, as it is for people in the community. How has the news of being ahead of the time frame been received by the businesses, the affected businesses?
I think in most cases, unless they can see a direct change outside their very doors, it's hard to put that into context. But for somewhere like the New Edinburgh Way, for example, where we did, because we were ahead, we're able to bring that work forward substantially. It means that we're going to be mostly out of there here by Christmas time. So that was very well received, obviously, in a block like that, where that lead up to Christmas is so important for them. They'd rather be, you know, having most of the area completed rather than us being part way through it. So I think in that respect, it's been well received.
And my final question, with what you learnt leading up to Christmas last year, I'm assuming that will inform what we do this year, and you'll have extra ideas as well?
Correct, yes. So the program has been built around getting out of as many blocks as possible by Christmas. So there's, you know, obviously a lot of work underway at the moment to get that to happen. Basically by Christmas we should be out of Golden Block, St Andrew and Hanover Streets. And obviously we'll be still working in New Edinburgh Way. We'll be out of Knox, but in New Edinburgh Way we'll be mostly done with the paving on the outside the shops. So, and then we'll take a break in the lead up to Christmas and then come back after Christmas.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Have there been any surprises when they're, you know, digging up the road? Like, have things popped up from an archaeological point of view? Have you found some things that have been quite surprising, or has there been anything like that? And have we got a rat problem under there? And has there been, you know, are things worse than you expected, or are they as expected?
I'll answer separately first. Archaeological wise, look, as a heritage person, I'm slightly disappointed in some respects that we haven't found more, but as a project manager, I'm very happy that we haven't found more. I guess the main stuff that we've found has been expected in terms of the archaeology. In terms of the rat question, I haven't seen any rats yet down there, but what we did find, which is probably more positive than I'd expected, is through some of the filming we found eels swimming up through the stormwater, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And in terms of how we're finding things, I guess in terms of the infrastructure itself, it's much as expected, that it is quite deteriorated in places, and in some locations we've had situations that even as we've taken the soil off the pipes, the weight of the soil has caused the pipes to fail. So I would say that we're in a good position that we were doing this at this time. Otherwise, we may be more like some other councils around the country dealing with more failures.
Can I ask one more? Are you noticing like the effects of climate change on any of the, like, is the water level higher there than you expected, or?
No, we haven't encountered any groundwater, so we've been pretty lucky in that sense. But obviously all the design of the infrastructure takes into account those climatic effects.
So it's fair to say you didn't find Jimmy Hoffa's body then. I've got a question for you. It's 14 and 15, and it goes back to what you answered, Councillor Gary. Just fleshing out what's going to be the activity around the Christmas shopping period. What will still be left to be done?
So in the lead up to Christmas, I'll go from north to south. We'll be out of the Knox block. We'll be out of there midway through July. We're coming to an end at the moment in that block. New Edinburgh Way, we're expecting that we'll have at least probably a 2.5 to 3 metre area of paving outside all of the shops complete, so the footpaths will be complete. We may still be working in the road, but the idea is to pull that back so it's not noisy work, so it's as attractive as possible for people coming in. Hanover, Golden, St Andrew, Farmers and Great King will be complete. So you're looking really at a stage by the time we get to Christmas, all going well with weather over the next couple of months, that we should be about 85 to 90% complete on the entire project.
Well, that's great news. And not on this report, but it is related to this work. The general whole activity of George Street then jumps to Princes Street, but the Octagon itself is not still in the plan, is that correct?
My understanding is it's not in the CCP plan.
And if we were to...
Oh, sorry, it's in the CCP, but it's not funded in the long-term plan.
So if the council was, this is now a question statement, if the council was of a mind to want to address that, then they'll have to address it by the 10-year plan. Correct? Because otherwise there'll be no funding in that next 3-year cycle.
That's correct. There's funding for Princess Street and Lower Stewart Street.
What I would say, if I may, but we are not doing any work. So if council wanted to do something in that space, a direction to actually cost it up would be useful, because the costing they'll work and actually understanding what would be involved will take longer than from, I would have thought, January to May.
So you'd need a resolution earlier than later on that regard for a costing?
That would be my understanding, because at the minute, yeah, Josh is nodding, because because it's not funded, no one is doing any work on planning or thinking about what it might cost.
Very good. I hate doing this normally because it's doing stuff in flow. We're just noting the retail upgrade report. We could potentially put an amendment to that to say request staff to do a costing of adding in the Octagon to the program, something to that effect.
So what would we want to do in the Octagon? Is the infrastructure around the Octagon, is there a concern that's badly deteriorated? What is the issue with the Octagon?
No, wait a minute, you're asking, no, that's, I'm talking about putting a motion up, so if anything you'd ask me rather than the staff, but it's really a costing motion to say that if we were to do it, what would it cost us to do it? It's not actually even committing, is it?
Well, Councillor O'Malley, what is the problem with the Octagon? Why do you want to do work at the Octagon? Can you clarify why we do work there?
I'll need to put the motion up before I could actually ask questions on the motion. And so I'm actually going to adjourn to write the motion, and then we'll put it back up. I want to come back in 6 minutes at 5 to 11. Seconded, Councillor Barker actually was early on that. All those in favour? Carried. 10:57 by my computer, so I'm going to call the meeting back to order. Lauren, can we have the amended resolution up? Questions are still open, and before we just go to questions, I'm just going to clarify what that amendment is, if we can see.
It's not an amendment, it's a resolution.
Sorry, what the resolution is, what part A of the resolution is. I'm also willing to take them in two parts when we vote. This simply is, from my perspective, something I've noted over the years of this whole project, is that we've got George Street and we've got Princess Street, and then this gap in between is simply not being thought about. So the purpose of this is to Councillor Benson perhaps going to rule any second there. The purpose of this will be to simply start the work on the process at looking at the costing. Okay, now I'll take questions. I know that Councillor Wiley has a question on the main report.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the Knox block and talk to the team around that. And with that being finished in mid-July, I understand there was going to be submissions to the parking review, so the parking bylaw hearing that was supposed to take place on Friday that's been pushed back until July. How will amendments or suggestions from that those submissions be taken into consideration?
Well, until those amendments come through, I guess we're building the plan that we are building, and we'd have to go back and make changes afterwards if there were. I think a number of the changes that have been suggested, though, only require changes to line marking rather than curb and channel, etc. So those would be relatively easy to complete.
Yep, no, actually I would agree with the line marking. That's good to know. The second part of that then is there going to be two lanes coming down from Pitt Street with one left-hand turning line turning into George Street, or is there only going to be the one lane coming down with, I believe there's no turn left, or there'll be a struggle to turn left into George Street?
The current plan has one lane down there so that we could gain some additional parking. Whether there is a left-hand turn or not is pretty much the moot point, because it's the same as it is at the moment, where you've got such a sharp angle that only certain vehicles can safely do a left turn there anyway. So we'll be basically returning it to the same configuration that it is now, but with only one lane there, and that gained us 3 extra car parks.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. If we were to do work at the Octagon, what do you propose that work would be? And I don't know who this question is to. I assume it would be to the people who would be doing the work, but...
No, that clarifying that, though, is my motion, is not to do the work at the moment, but it is to get a costing on the work.
But what costing, costing for what?
Surface treatments, and then checking whether or not the under material needs to be done or not. So whether the 3 waters there needs to be done or not.
So, look, this isn't even turning off. So, can I just clarify, do we not know if the Octagon has older pipes?
We will know, but staff are not prepared for those questions, so we haven't. No one here will have detailed knowledge. We'll have to go back and talk to the team that have detailed knowledge.
So, to work out if there's old pipes or work needs to be done in this area, would this mean digging up the whole of the Octagon?
I think we're too early in on that discussion. That's not what this is saying. It's saying, can we actually find out the answer to that question?
Yeah. So we can, yes. So we'll know how old the pipes are. We will have CCTV camera some of the pipes, or we can go and CCTV some of them if we don't have that information. So this will be purely a desktop study, non-intrusive, to present council with some options.
Okay, Councillor Barker.
Dr. Hazelden, you're integral to the Centre City Plan, and I wonder if you could give us an update on the Octagon precinct in here? Are you don't know if you're prepared for that because I have it in front of me.
Perhaps because you have it in front of you, Councillor.
I will talk to it in my speech.
Councillor Gary.
This is a question for you, Mr. Chair. Is the purpose of the motion to give us as much information as possible ready for the long-term plan?
Yes, and if we don't get that information in time for this long-term plan, then it would be another further 3 years out if we would decide to include it or not. And so it's really making sure that we don't miss out on a 3-year cycle of considering that work.
Indeed, thank you.
Caught you. Mr. Mayor.
Yes, so what's involved in the Octagon component of the Central City Plan? Because you're talking about underground works and investigation of the pipes, yet to my mind the Central City Plan involves above ground works as well. What do you actually have in mind here? Above, below, or both?
I would imagine that as Mr. Drew's point has just answered, that a desktop survey of the condition of what is below the ground will determine whether or not we have to have an intervention there or not. And obviously if the answer to that is no, in the time frame that relates to the surface treatments, then presumably as a group we would make that decision on whether we wanted to do that or not. It would seem unlikely. If the answer to that is yes, then it would be something that we as governance would have to consider related to the fact that we're doing works at both ends.
Very good. So can the motion be altered to reflect that? So this is an investigation, a desktop investigation for the underground works, the state of the underground infrastructure underneath the Octagon and Moray Place.
Mr. Chair, if I might, while the underground infrastructure will be what drives any work, once you've dug the road up, the question then becomes how do you want to replace it? So I think it would be, I think councillors will need to, if you decide to do this, think about how you want to replace the surface, because you don't want to dig it up, asphalt it, and then decide you want to do something different in 10 years' time, because that disruption would be problematic. So they are linked.
And so this motion really is opening up a big can of worms, because what about the design of the Octagon? Yeah, well, the design of the Octagon would make a very significant changes to the design of the Octagon would make a very
Point of order.
Point of order.
We're having a debate here, Mr. Chairman, not questions.
We are in question time, so I did actually say a question, I do believe. I can't. Can you repeat it again?
So what about the Octagon?
I think you said a question, so I'll overrule that bit.
The question is, as I started from the beginning, the surface treatments versus the underground works. And as you said, this question is, well, the motion is about the underground work. So my question coming back to, would it not be best to, primarily focus on those underground works so we know what's under there? Because
the motion's not primarily about the underground works. And it's written in this way so that the staff can do both finished work and underground work assessments, so we can have an idea of what we're looking at. So it is not a commitment. It is simply saying, I have observed, and I believe many people in this chamber have observed, that we're doing all this work on George Street, all this work on Princes Street, and there's 3 blocks that are simply not completely considered at the moment. So I'm asking that those be brought into consideration. And that's it. We may find at the end of this, we say, wow, that bill's so big we won't go near it. But we don't know what that number is. And it would have to include both surface and underground.
Yeah, so how much work will it take to come up with some options, gentlemen?
We can work through that. I guess what I'm envisaging at this point, and just knowing that this is very early news to us, the team, and we haven't considered it. The previous, 2 LTPs ago, staff presented to council options. They were titled bronze, silver and gold. So effectively it was level of ambition around surface treatments. So that's what I'm envisaging with this work, bronze, silver, gold, and we can somehow articulate maybe with some visuals of what bronze, silver and gold surface treatment looks like, and then the Three Waters infrastructure will just be what is the need.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Can I just clarify, had we always planned to do the Octagon as part of the upgrade, or was that not considered at all? Is this new? That's what I'm wondering.
The city plan is not new, but the budgeting. Well, I'll let Dr. Hazelton.
The Octagon has always been included in the Central City Plan, but there has been no funding allocated to physical works in it in the long-term plan. So it was always included as a key part, but it just hasn't been funded.
So it was, the plan was to actually do work at the Octagon, but we just didn't, for some reason, have it in the budget. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Because my next question was going to be, why don't we know what sort of state the pipes are like in the Octagon, if that was the plan? But is it just time and money, or?
We do know what state the pipes are in. I was just saying that staff here don't have detailed knowledge of it, so we can't answer those questions without speaking to the staff that do have detailed knowledge.
They're not here. Okay, so they're not here, but you're aware that there is issues with the Octagon. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying I don't have detailed knowledge of the condition of the pipes in the Octagon, but I do have staff that will know.
And just reminding councillors, this is something that has come on the fly at this meeting, so the people who are here to talk to something that is related but slightly different.
My concern is that this has come on the fly, and I'm just worried that all of a sudden this seems to have come from nowhere, and I'm trying to work out if this was clearly in the plan, and if it was in the plan, why is it now being put to us like this in a surprised way, when why isn't there a timeline for it to happen? You know what I mean? Like, if it was planned, when was it going to be done? What timeline did we have for it if we were going to do it?
I'll stay and debate why I'm putting this motion up, which will help address that question.
I think that's a fair question to
I do,
ask.
that's why I'll answer it.
I can help with that. So previous councils have elected to fund George Street, Princess Street and Lower Stewart Street. So based on that, I assume that once those projects were done, the Octagon would then follow. So it's a timing issue, and I think what Councillor O'Malley is requesting staff is some information so council consider the timing of these projects, and it might be that you choose to rephase some of the projects.
Have the businesses in the Octagon area and the public been consulted on the Octagon?
No, the businesses have only been, so there was a consultation period a long time ago with the CCP. Then businesses were consulted with on the George Street project. If we were to move to Princess Street next, or Lower Stewart Street, then the business would be consulted with. I assume that Councillor O'Malley is asking us to bring this in time for the long-term plan. So if you are to make a significant decision, you can consult with the community during the long-term plan.
And look, just on that, the inclusion of the Octagon works would likely be a major subject of consultation as part of the 10-year plan if council wishes to do it. But it's unfunded at the moment, so at the minute there is nothing to consult with. I think that's the issue.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking for clarification from you, actually. Can you just assure us around the table that if Councillor Houlihan and or others have an issue with the motion at hand, they can vote against it?
Well, that would be standard practice, yes.
Thank you.
Point of order, that's absolutely disrespectful.
I don't think it meets the threshold. I've heard your point, but I don't think it meets the threshold for disrespect. Any more questions? Councillor Lucas.
I think I've got a question because I'm just struggling. I've just opened up the Dunedin Central City Plan, and there's just a very high level concept drawing there of the Octagon, and there's some commentary about the issues in the Octagon, but there isn't actually any real thought about what the Octagon might look like. So what I'm struggling, and I don't know whether this is a question to you, Mr. Chair, is exactly what cost options would be brought in to the table, apart from obviously the infrastructure, but in terms of, as you, I think you said, the surface treatments. I'm not sure whether previous councils. That's what I'm struggling. I'm just trying to get my head around what.
Well, this quite literally is. I mean, it's almost a surprise to me. I brought it up so late. Now, by that I don't mean I haven't considered it. I actually have been considering this for a long time because it's obvious to me that this is missing. The issue probably would be more like what Mr. Drew said, which is that when we, the council at the time, looked at the costing of George Street, we looked at 3 different levels of treatment finish, and that was done by square meterage. So if we know the area we're looking at, and then the staff update those 3 values, bronze, silver, we went silver by the way, bronze was pretty nasty, then basically we'll be able to come to a number that is sufficiently informed that we would know within a certain percentage of what the cost is going to look like. But at the moment we have no number.
If I can just add to that, that's what happened. Gold, silver, bronze, council chose a level, and then knowing that that was the level, staff then proceeded to go away and work with affected parties and do the design, knowing the envelope that council were prepared to commit to the surface treatment. So the design follows knowing what we've got.
Councillor Wiley.
A question that I'd like to direct to Mr. Drew, or the CEO. There was always a vision to upgrade the Octagon. Am I correct in saying that?
What's in the Central City Plan? Just unfunded.
And also, part of that was there were, and I'm just trying to put at ease some of the, what I can see some of the concerns, is that any time we would be looking at, after getting some costs, there would be full engagement with the community and full consultation as part of that process. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then this work that, if undertaken and if passed at the meeting, would be consideration for the 2024-2034 long-term plan, but that could easily be rolled into the 2027-37 plan, etc., etc. So this is a scoping piece of work, not starting a detailed piece of work.
Where the funding, were council to decide to want to do this and then discuss it as long-term plan, consult with the community, once all of those steps had been through, you could then decide where in the 10-year plan you put it in the budget, and it potentially could be year 10 of the 10-year plan.
Any more questions? Okay, then I'm going to read it out for Ms. McDonald because it's hard to read from back way over there. I move that the committee, and I'll take these in 2 parts, A and B, when we vote on them. A, request staff to cost options for the Octagon component of the Central City Plan and the Moray Place to Octagon section of George Street in time for consideration at the Long-Term Plan 2024-2034 budget meetings. And B, notes the retail quarter upgrade and update report. And I believe Councillor Benson Pope is seconding that. Do I have anybody who wishes to speak? Councillor Barker.
I am in absolute support of this because the Octagon has been a great big, I won't call it an ugly gap, but I just did, in our upgrades, and many people have brought up why the centre of city looks run down, messy. We've got trip hazards in there. I don't know how many of you have got lots of emails about people tripping up over it. We've got, gosh, is it 4 different types of tiles? And we walked from the car park through to the councillor office, and I myself has slipped over and hurt myself on those tiles. So it is dangerous. When we go back to the original plan, which was started in 2011 with a whole lot of consultation with people about what the city would look like, we ended up with the Centre City Plan and a key transformational project upgrade of the Octagon. This is primarily an amenity project intended to enhance the Octagon as a vibrant, exciting civic space accessible by the widest range of visitors. And it talks about the Octagon being the city's civic, entertainment and tourism centre, providing a hub for visitors and locals alike. There's quite a lot on that page, so I'm not going to read it all out. But also it was focused on the need to complete the Three Waters infrastructure renewals and paving upgrades. Now, it's really important for us to actually get this on our work plan and in our budget. I think it was Councillor O'Malley who noticed that the Smooth Hill wasn't in the work program, wasn't on the budget, so we've been rushing to catch up on then. So this will go into the budget to be considered at the long-term plan, and we will have a lot of different things to consider in the long-term plan. The important thing is to get it in, to decide whether and when we want to do this work. The Octagon is embarrassing. We know so many of our visitors and people who come here for rugby games, from cruise ships, etc., land in the Octagon, and it looks run down and sad. It needs some work. The plan says this is primarily an amenity project intended to enhance the Octagon as a vibrant, exciting civic space accessible by the widest range of users. And it says no final design has been developed for this day. This is a work in progress, but in order to make it a work in progress, we actually need to start doing some work. We need to balance it obviously against all of the other work, and this is the intention, this is the time to start looking at what we want to get into the long-term plan. When we look at feedback from people who actually live here, they are talking about that the Octagon needs work. It's tired, it's ridiculous for us to do the work in George Street, the work in Princess Street, and not have the actual heart of our city being worked on and being an amazing, vibrant space for people to enjoy. So I fully support this.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. I will be supporting this as well because of what it says. It's a request for cost options and for consideration at the long-term plan. When we look at the Centre City plan, there is a lot more work to do than just George Street. I know my friends that consistently come after me over the exchange area will be saying, well, what about the exchange? So I think we'll see a motion come forward at some point soon about that for the same request, because that also needs to be done. So this is about starting a discussion, but remember, actually the discussion's been going on for many years. It's not a new discussion, and come 2035 I think we'd all want to see an updated Octagon area. What that looks like, well, time will tell, but I would like to think that in the next 12 years there will be a refreshed Octagon, and this is another part of the process that we have to undertake, and I'm pretty sure through the long-term plan process we will hear it loud and clearly from the community, but it's also a case of trying to maximise the funding and the costs and our essentially debt ratio, etc. That what can we do and how we can do it. But for the first step for the long-term plan 2024-34, I'll support this motion.
Councillor Gary, and then I've got Mr Mayor, Councillor Mayhem, Councillor Houlihan and Councillor Ackland.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I'm going to start with B because this report and the purpose of the report has got somewhat subsumed by the addition of part of the motion. So I want to hugely congratulate our DCC staff and in the room Dr Hazelton and Mr Van Pine and thank them for their leadership and thank the contractors, Isaacs, for their leadership and their work to deliver not just on time, but ahead of time, considerably ahead of time, the George Street project. And not just on budget, but under budget. And that is significant. And I just want to remind my colleagues that it's really important that we acknowledge our staff and the efforts they make to deliver for the decisions we make. And I'm going to digress very briefly, if I may, Mr. Chair, and just remind people that yesterday we attended another project, Te Puna o Whakaaehu, another project delivered by our staff in an extraordinary way, a project that's been on the books for a long time, as has George Street, and I want to thank those staff whose efforts were tremendous in terms of that. It was a moment of great pride, as I know George Street will be. So thank you to those staff, Mr. Pickford, Mr. McLean, and all of the people who were involved in the smooth opening yesterday. So moving on to A, this has come out of left field, but I'm mystified why colleagues can't quite grasp the fact that we're trying to inform ourselves as best we can as governors for all the options that might be ahead of us, and to look ahead as we start to prepare for the long-term plan. So we need to be considering this now. We need to know what the costings are so we can put it in the mix and make a decision. This is about gathering more specific information towards our decisions in the LTP. So at this point, I'm not going to argue as to why the Octagon needs to be upgraded. I'll leave that for the time when we're making a decision. But what I would encourage everyone to do is to make sure we have all of the information ahead of us when we come to the LTP, and we have to start now for that. So that's what that motion is about. Nothing more, nothing less. And I would encourage you all to support it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, look, I'm very pleased to note the retail quarter upgrade, and I do commend the staff for the work that they have done, and especially, having learned some lessons in that farmers block, pressing on and getting really improving the efficiency of what is being done there. And I think that's to tremendous credit, in particular for the Project Management Office, but also Dr. Hailston for working with the community in that area to make things happen, and to get the path smoothed in advance of the people doing the work. And it really shows, and we can see it shows actually in the bottom line. So it's now ahead of time and budget. So it also speaks to the effectiveness of the Project Management Office, which is a wonderful thing to have within our ranks. However, I think at this stage it's premature on Part A. I think it's far too soon for us to be pushing for the Octagon, because we haven't seen how George Street works yet, and how we're going to manage those traffic flows, and how the Octagon should best look. I have no argument with doing up the Octagon in the fullness of time, but I think it's very early to have a rushed report in time for the, albeit a desktop one, in time for the long-term plan, and then start making very large and expensive decisions on that basis. The Central City, so far, this retail quarter upgrade is a $100 million project, and I think if we're going to have that Octagon project, we're going to do up that Octagon, that is actually the centrepiece of the town, and we want to make sure that it is integrated properly with the rest of the town, in particular the retail quarter, which is vitally important as the main shopping street of Dunedin. And I think we want to be very considered about what we do with the Octagon. I think it's far too soon to be putting in, to start costing options when we don't know how it would look and how it's going to integrate with that street. I think we need to have that street, the George Street, working and operational, and see how traffic flows and see how those shops fare, so that we have a much better idea of what we want to do with the Octagon thereafter. So I'll be voting against Part A, because I do not believe that is an appropriate time at this point to start making plans for the Octagon. And we don't know how and what it's going to take to make George Street work well for the key stakeholders in that region.
Councillor Hurleham.
Thank you, Chair. I have concerns about something such a massive project being put on us at last minute like this as a surprise amendment to a motion. I think something like this, we need to have a staff report. We need to know the pros, the cons, and be able to ask staff questions about it. We haven't been able to ask any questions. I mean, thank you, Mr. Drew. I got some questions from Mr. Drew, who is an extremely helpful person. And so, but we can't, there's a lot more questions I would have asked, but we weren't able to ask the project managers questions on this. I appreciate the passion from the mover on this. However, my major concern is as well, before we go ahead and do something like this, we need to have more consultation and more, we can't just rush in and start doing this sort of thing when I think most people didn't realise this was happening. Some people around the table...
Point of order.
Point of order.
The council is repeatedly misrepresenting what's in the motion, Mr. Chairman. It's not about rushing in and doing anything. It's about, as other speakers have said, requiring and requesting information for the report that she wants to have so she can ask questions about it. So I think I'd ask you to rule that she needs to stick to what's up there, not what's floating around elsewhere.
Thank you. I will actually uphold that. Point of order, Councillor. I think the issue is that the way you are describing this motion is not how I've intended it to be interpreted, and I have made that statement clear a couple of times. So I do agree with the councillor that you are misrepresenting my intention of this motion. And I will cover what I plan to, why I'm doing that in my right of reply. So if you could just start again and...
Yeah, I won't be supporting A. It's very clear of that. We're wanting to rip apart the heart of our city, and I've got major concerns about this.
Point of order.
Point of order.
A misrepresentation.
Ripping apart the heart of our city, I assume, is the misrepresentation.
Yes.
Councillor, do you think that was an accurate statement?
Are we going to be ripping up the ground in the Octagon?
And is that the heart of our city? No, we're not. This motion is actually not to do that. This motion is to ask the cost of what it would be to do if we were to do that. And so the debate that you would ask as to whether we will or will not will be heavily dependent on the numbers that are generated through this report. So we're not digging up the Octagon as per this motion. I take it that's you finished then?
No, I've still got more to say.
Well, away you go.
Thank you. Our businesses in our city and the members of the public that have to drive through it every day have been very patient, most of them, not all of them, have been very patient with us. It's been an extremely huge project so far, and hopefully it will look great once it's finished. Nobody's got an issue with that, but it is trying times for many businesses who are struggling to make ends meet, some of them. And to now put this on us at this time, I think, is a huge ask for people in our city. And I think we'll have people going up in arms about it, quite frankly. And I know when we had... I'm going to call a point of order this time. This motion is not about digging up the Octagon. It is about getting a request for the costing if we were to choose to do so, which we are not deciding today. Okay, I'm happy to say, to rectify, it is about a cost to dig up the Octagon. Okay, that's fine. So I remember the debate we had, and it was a vicious one, around when we looked to propose to close off the Octagon, and the absolute fight back we had from the businesses in the Octagon at that time and members of the public. I voted against that, and now I can see this is going to be coming through, and this is what will be possibly one of the consequences of this, and I have serious concerns about the whole process.
Councillor Mayhem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm overjoyed. I think Councillor Mayhem is very... Councillor O'Malley is very timely with this. The heart of the city, the core of wonderful Dunedin, our unique identity. It's not a square, it's an octagon. I've said for a long time that it's overdue for some vibrancy and rejigging. Nobody's talking about digging anything up just yet. Questions and consultations will come in the fullness of time. I'll be supporting this motion because all it's asking is that we consider this report for the long-term plan, and we need to if we're going to do something about the Octagon. Deputy Mayor Sophie draws attention to the slippery surfaces, something that I continually advocate for as an accessible and inclusive city for everybody. I think refurbishment of the Octagon is the missing link in our street upgrades. Entertainment, a hub, a place to gather, a refreshed and vibrant area that reflects our livable city, that's welcoming and gives a sense of ownership for all of our residents. A good town centre has a framework and design that creates harmony amongst the buildings and open spaces for cars and pedestrians and all modes of transports, where work, leisure, residential and commercial use is incorporated, and entertaining, a shopping place to be. Let's create a wonderful atmosphere in the Octagon and bring people in to the heart of our city, visitors and residents. I think it will be fantastic. Let's see what the report says. Thank you.
Councillor Ackland.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Starting with B, same as everybody else, fantastic work by staff to have gained the sort of traction that you've done since the farmers block. The numbers are speaking for themselves, and huge congratulations to you. In relation to A, I'm extremely passionate about the Octagon, always have been. In fact, the first time that I stood for council, which was in 2001, was because a big stage that was in the Octagon was being pulled down, and because council decided that it shouldn't be there. In fact, technically it wasn't supposed to be there long term anyway because of the fact that it's a reserve. I thought that could have been changed, and it could have been, but there was no desire to do so. So I kicked up a fuss, set up a keyboard, and in the middle of the Octagon, and actually played in protest while they actually took the thing down. It didn't change anything, and it's been gone ever since. I think the Octagon really does need a huge makeover. I think it needs to be at the focus of the city. It really does, and I think the entertainment factor, the layout of how that could be done is something that we've got a huge opportunity to build into whatever other components in the Octagon redevelopment would look like. Mr Chairman, I'm sorry though that this particular, or the wording of this at least, when it says request staff to cost options, well, what options is what I'm saying. What are the options? Is it just about the footpaths or the drainage or whatever, and the surfaces and things? Or is it getting into really what is this about and why on earth would you do it in the first place? And I think the why is the first question, and then next to that, when we talk about costing options, I think that council has not had an opportunity to workshop this, and it needs to have that before we get to the stage of asking for these sorts of reports. Because, you know, again, I totally sympathise with where you're coming from, Mr Chairman, because, again, this is a long time overdue. But I don't think that this is the way to do it. It'd be great to get something in for the long-term plan coming up. It really would. But again, I'm concerned that what this is asking for is not the full picture. And so, regretfully, I'm going to be voting against A.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair. And yeah, just like everybody in Part B, just big ups to all the team involved in what is fantastic work. Often walking down there every day, it's incredible. It includes all the project team and, of course, people like Isaacs and everybody who's involved. It's quite amazing. And the second part, I'm fully in support, actually. It's very clear in the motion that it's about costing, it's about information, it's about data, the very things we need as governors around this table to make decisions when that's presented to us. And I don't think we should preempt what we would think about that until we see that. In terms of the ongoing work, I mean, I've always been a little bit perplexed that just a wee bit from Murray Place to the Octagon is what I always refer to as the missing link, actually. The Octagon, again, as people have said, it's run down, it's tired, it's dowdy, it's slippy. And it's about to be completely out of context with what I think is about to be by far the best looking and funkiest high street in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I look forward to these options coming to us, and I have fingers crossed that costs nothing, we can do it.
It's a good idea. Ms. Matariki. Matahau. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to indicate that I'd be supporting both A and B, and specifically just because we need this motion to get it under consideration in time for the long-term plan. So that's my reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Witherall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with B, the retail upgrade report. I'm happy to vote for that. I think that $7 million in savings is quite remarkable, especially in this time of high inflation. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the continued patience of retailers and the shopping public having to go through the upheaval of this upgrade, and I'm looking forward to its earlier completion. In regards to A, I think it has merit, what we're trying to propose today, and I will be voting along with it. I think it will be somewhat rushed, and the cost options will be, and the report will be something of a Clayton's report. I think it will be rushed, but 3 years is a very long time to wait for an inclusion, and I think I cannot fathom how the whole Central City upgrade was started at the Murray Place opposed to the Octagon. I cannot understand how it was never started there originally. I'm also aware of the city's debt going in the direction that it is, and it's still rising, and the buy now, pay later feel that a lot of the city and the country is running on at the moment is quite simply not acceptable to the rate-paying public of Dunedin. So if we do decide on the cost options and we get an inclusion in the long-term plan, which I think I'm not against the Octagon being upgraded, but something has to give. We cannot keep spending money on an ageing city. It's the best city in New Zealand in my belief, but we've got big problems in the city because we're an ageing city and everything is breaking down at the same time. So something will have to give if we do look at this, and I'm of the firm belief we should look at the Octagon. It's the central place of our city, but quite honestly, other projects will have to be put on the back burner, unfortunately, if this proceeds. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for bringing this amendment to the meeting. I'd like to also start with B. I, like everyone else, have been amazed at the quality of the work that's been done, not just the achievement of staff in terms of the budget and the timing. And I'm glad that both of the principal people behind that are still here, because they deserve to be thoroughly congratulated for yet another extraordinarily successful project delivery. And of course, in the case of Dr. Hazelton, it ain't the first, and it won't be the last, one hopes. I am looking forward to seeing the other blocks of George Street complete, but one of the things that has impressed me most around the work is the enabling works in the adjacent streets. The quality of the paving around the hospital in Great King, at Hanover and so on, the first block that was done down from the side entrance to the Meridian car park is top work. And I think just as the work that was done by expert contractors in the warehouse precinct has weathered beautifully and shown the value of top quality work, done by skilled people. We've seen exactly the same from Isaacs and the people they've used and the designers. The extra element, of course, that exists in George Street is something that is particularly special. After the further cooperation with local iwi, and pretty topical, really, given the glowing comments that have been made about further gifting and a further development of that relationship. So I would want to talk about B as well, A as well, and no one would be surprised that I have some comments to make. If I had known this was emerging today, I could have brought along my collection of reports about the future of the centre of the city, heart in our city, Dunedin in the year 2000. There are a lot of them, and they all talk about the Octagon, and repeatedly we haven't had the nous to bite the bullet and do the work. The misogyny that was involved in the previous consultation about the Octagon and possible changes was extraordinary, and let's not beat around the bush about that. It was a direct attack on the woman who'd been involved with that project and was totally unacceptable. And so the history of how our community has dealt with this and how people around this table, not those sitting here now, have dealt with it is not one that we should be proud of. But Councillor O'Malley is completely correct. The Octagon has always been too hot a potato for anyone to make funding decisions about it. It might be in the plan, but we'll just have to push that off. And it's not the first thing, and it won't be the last time that we have things in planning that are not funded because we don't know quite what we're going to do. But do something we must, and when the 2 wings are done, the 3 wings are done, wouldn't it be stupid not to have the same quality of work, whatever it might look like, in the very centre of the city? And I'm just disappointed, I must say, that there are a few people around the table who remain visionless and are still trying to stop things happening. We know that times are tough. We know that we are short on international tourism and other visitors and so on. We know that we are competing with every other city in this country. And what do? Well, the last thing we do is not make our city look as good as it possibly can. First of all, for residents, but the public spaces in the centre of the city are tired. George Street, our retail street, won't be in a few short months, but the Octagon is, and some of the link streets and to the Morris Place circuit are also in need of attention. We are not, despite the confusion that still reigns with 1 or 2 councillors, we are not talking about committing any work here. We are talking very sensibly about asking for the sort of rough order of cost of various options to start addressing this work, so that if we choose to, and we will consult on it, if we choose to, it can be consulted on in the normal, formal way as part of our planning processes. And in fact, we've already had some submissions as part of the annual plan, including from one of the members of this council, about the need to do this work.
Councillor Fise.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair. I would just like to echo other speakers' thanks and congratulations to the CEO and all her staff, Dr Hazelton and Mr Von Pine in particular, and also mention thanks and congratulations to the contractors and just acknowledging them and their whānau and the challenges that they've gone through as we've debated whether to stop or carry on or whatever we've done. And I just want to thank the Chair for his leadership. Again, as Councillor Barker said, I naively, when staff started talking to us about Smooth Hill, I was so naive. I thought, But given our need to do something in terms of climate change, I was thinking, but why would we need a landfill in 20 years' time? Anyway, so I just want to acknowledge Councillor O'Malley's leadership in that space, and again, constantly thinking, knowing of the debates we've had in the last 2 trienniums about the vision. And again, I say we can only talk, when we talk about the rate-paying public, we've got to be aware that there are some ratepayers who have come to us and said, charge me more rates. We want to be part of investing in the future. And again, infrastructure is about people. Our people deserve investment. And if we can look at Three Waters, we're going through Three Waters because councils all over the country have deferred investment. And that's what you're talking about. So, it's not time yet. It's time yesterday to invest in our people, and we've got to be creative. It's not about increasing debt or stuff. We've got to be creative. We should be intelligent enough to find other ways of making our investments in the people and valuing our people. Thank you.
I don't think I have to ask, are there any more speakers? I believe everybody has now spoken. Except for Ms McDonald, who does not have a hand up. So I think we'll move on, and I'll do my right of reply, which of course, the second time in today's meeting I've forgotten to do the opening speech. The purpose of, I'm going to start with B as well, because I think obviously it is the point of the report, and I really want to acknowledge the incredible work that's been done on George Street to date. It's proof that in fact this council is getting its act together on lots of fronts. Its relationships to the contractors, how it plans into the future, all that stuff is starting to come to fruit, to bear, and we're seeing that in projects that are coming in on budget and ahead of time. Which brings me to part A. I'm very conscious of the fact that when it comes to budgeting items, it's 3 to 6 to 9 years between you first scaring everybody with an idea and then the shovels actually hitting the soil. We're getting into a situation where by next Christmas most of George Street will be done, and we'll be right on the edge of the long-term plan, and we've done nothing again about George Street. And that means if we miss that long-term plan, any planning on the Octagon will be pushed along by 3 years, because there's just no budgets there. So this is not, if you read it, it is not to work on the Octagon and immediately do all the work on the Moray Place to Octagon George Street section. It is just to get a costing so we know what we need, what we are facing. It is the first step that you do every time when you try to get into a major project. So if we don't do this first step, we're just quite literally just pushing it down the road for another 3 years, which has been pointed out has been the favourite action of previous councils, simply not to get into the middle of this. Councillor Barker's the 6 different pavers, that actually was the first attempt to figure out, that was the first attempt on doing something about the Octagon. That was Crystal Philippe's putting those pavers out there so we can see how slippery and how well they weathered. And actually some have turned out to be quite slippery and not weathering very well at all. But that in fact means even 5 to 6 years ago we were still thinking about the Octagon but had not really formalised what we're doing about it. This is starting the action towards formalising it. To the Mayor's statement about that this will be a rushed report. The first report will always be a fairly high order, relatively low on detail report so that we can actually then start asking the questions that we want to ask. But if you don't do that first report, you're always caught in the same space. You're always caught, well, we haven't done it, so we can't move on. So it has to get done. Otherwise, we're going to quite literally, deliberately do George Street, deliberately do Princess Street, and then turn around and go, oh, we haven't planned for the Octagon yet, even though it's in the Central City Plan. So this is really about just aligning stuff so that it can be funded for when it needs to be funded if we decide. We may decide that that is fine. Councillor Wiley brought up the very relevant point. Even if we make the 24-34 long-term plan, it doesn't mean we're planning on years 1, 2 and 3, 24, 25, 26. We could put this in 27 or 28 and it would have a placeholder number in as much the same way that anything in the 10-year plan that's 6 or 7 years out from the start usually has a good assessment, but it isn't the final number because we haven't put the work in, because we're putting all the work into the stuff that's coming into the first 3 years. But if we postpone this, again, it'll just be postponed further out and further out and further out. So we can't keep doing that. And that was the general theme, I think, of those who are saying they would support this. To Councillor Ackland, I would be very disappointed if this was to pass and the staff do come through with the costing options, that as we move forward on this we didn't have the workshops, because obviously those workshops become the most important component. I think this would just be, what I'd be looking for here is a very high order statement saying if it costs us this per square metre to George Street and there are this many square metres in the Octagon, then if the cost transferred through, this would be the cost. At least we know the magnitude of what we're facing at that point. And it wouldn't be that is nothing like putting together, you know, a proper program business case with all of the costings in there, but it's more a case of assessing whether or not you want to go in that direction. And I feel that's all that this is at the moment. It is getting us to the point that we just don't forget it. Because my biggest concern, quite literally, is we would just carry on and then in 6 years' time we'll go, oh, what about the Octagon? And we haven't done anything about it. I almost guarantee that as soon as George Street is finished, people are going to look at it and go, well, why did we stop at Moray Place? And the point of this is that we're getting moving on answering that question ahead of time. Otherwise, if we wait for everything to settle and everything to go down flat, then we'll be starting right here where we are now, but it might be 2026 before we've even started, and that would be pushing us way too far out. So that's all this is. It's quite literally a timing event. It's to get the ball moving, and so that we can then consider it. We are not making a decision today. The only thing we're doing is asking for staff to give us a report that can then be used in the public consultation component of the long-term plan, and that's where the people of the city will make the call as to whether or not they believe it's a worthwhile investment or not. So I'm encouraging you to vote yes on both A and B. I will take them separately and I'll take them both by division. So if we can start with A, please.
Councillor Ackland?
No.
Councillor Barker?
Aye.
Councillor Benson-Pope? Aye. Councillor Gary?
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan? Councillor Lafiso?
Aye.
Councillor Lucas?
No.
Ms McDonald?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you. Ms Matahiri Atariki? Aye. Councillor Mayhem?
Yes.
Mayor Raddick?
No.
Councillor Walker?
Aye.
Councillor Weatherall?
Aye.
Councillor Wiley?
Yes.
And the Chair?
Aye.
So the motion is 4-11 against 4 is carried.
Now part B.
Yes, part B. Sorry. Councillor Ackland?
Aye.
Councillor Barker?
Aye.
Councillor Benson-Pope? Aye. Councillor Gary?
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan? Aye. Councillor Lafiso? Aye. Councillor Lucas?
Aye.
Ms McDonald?
Aye.
Ms Matariki?
Aye.
Sorry, I did it too. Apologies. Councillor Mayhem?
Aye.
Mayor Raddick?
Aye.
Councillor Walker? Aye. Councillor Weatherall?
Aye.
Councillor Wiley?
Yes.
Councillor O'Malley?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Excellent. And that moves item 10 finished, and moving on to item 11, naming of a private way, which Councillor Barker has already indicated to me ahead of the meeting that she will want to move when we get there. Better wait for staff to turn up first. Question? I assume you want us just to take it as read?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope has a question.
Just a question in terms of the splitting up of parts of names. I mean, we all know Ethel Benjamin Place and the use of whole names to recognise famous contributors, former members of our community. I just find it odd to separate Caroline Freeman from her surname in the name. Can you comment on that?
No, I think other than just the staff have assessed it in relation to the road naming policy, and it, yeah, correct.
Well, perhaps this is a procedural thing. I'd like to test the feeling of the meeting. Is it possible to actually, I'm sure it's possible for us to name the street whatever we like. It seems to be much more appropriate to use the person's, such a distinguished person's whole name rather than a bit of it. I mean, Caroline Way is a bit esoteric. And I'm wondering if you would entertain, Mr. Chairman, a motion that we name the street Caroline Freeman Way.
My first piece of advice I would need, which I'll have to adjourn the meeting for, is whether or not we have the authority. So I'll adjourn the meeting for 3 minutes. Councillor Fiso, second. All those in favour?
Hang on a minute.
That's all right.
Just go.
There's already
the resolution put up. Do you want to move that, Councillor Benson-Pope? I'll be happy to second it. Do you want to speak to it? It's a procedure motion, so what happened? I'll put without discussion. So, read that, understand what you're looking at. And obviously from the questions you can understand why that's happened. So I'll put it, all those in favour? All those against? Carried. And that makes us to item 12, updates from government entities. This is, Stacey put this up, but will you sit there for a second? This is the minutes from the Regional Transport Committee meeting that was held recently. I would just simply say, looking at it, there's nothing particularly spectacular in those meetings. I would note, though, I did note as I was looking at it, that the items are bilingual, and we had no trouble navigating our way through the meeting. So anyway, there's not particularly much. Sometimes this becomes more or less, but Councillor Gary.
I wanted to know timing because not being someone that participates in that meeting, it isn't necessarily clear to me when the items that we have asked to be put on the Regional Land Transport Plan, when those discussions take place. So can you speak to that in terms of those minutes, please?
Well, in terms of these minutes, this was a meeting that was occurred before your resolution, so preceded that. Ms Benson, can you talk about the activities of the Technical Advisory Group and the formation of the Regional Land Transport Plan?
Of course. So we are planning to have our first draft of the RLTP in front of Wakakotahi sort of mid-August. That's the very first draft. It goes through an iterative process between August and around November of that same that same year, and that sort of lines up with or should line up with the GPS. So it's I think our intention is to probably bring a report to ISCOM on the update of the ISCOM in the middle of the update of the RLTP in the middle of the year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then I move that the committee notes the draft minutes from the Otago Southern Regional Transport Committee meeting dated 12th of May 2023. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Barker. All those, does anybody want to speak to it? I don't think so. As I said, we note that we put these minutes in so you have a chance to read them so we understand what's going on in those meetings. That's primarily the activity here. Okay, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 13, items for consideration by the Chair. Councillor Wiley has flagged that he has some.
Yes, as per debate over the previous motion on the Octagon, I'd like to ask for a report to the committee requesting cost options for the exchange area component of the Central City Plan and time for consideration at the Long-Term Plan 2024-2034 budget meetings.
So this is an item for consideration by the Chair, so it doesn't really constitute a full movement. My question will be, as of staff now, I thought the Princess Street was going to the Octagon, to the exchange anyway, right? So do you have...
Yeah, so procedurally, Mr Chair, you can choose to accept the item, at which point you then consider it, and I'd suggest that you just accept it, consider it, and staff will provide advice
Yes.
about whether or not a report is necessary.
Okay, I will accept it and consider it. Thank you. Any other items for consideration for the Chair? Cool, then we'll move on to just finishing the meeting. I'm just going to finish with a karakia. Ka whaka kaira te tapu kia watia ia te ara kia turiki whakatahi ai kia turiki whakatahi ai haumi ai hui ai taiki ai.
Mr Chairman, could I just ask to be indulged with a question for the Chief Executive about timing of meetings? May I? It's just that had we not had some entertainment at the at the public forum this morning, and had you not... Oh. Thank you. I'll be happy to hear that in due course.
Thank you. In case I didn't do it, I close the meeting at 12:05.
Good afternoon, councillors. It's 1 o'clock, so I think it's time to start the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee meeting for today, Tuesday the 20th of June. We have no public forum, and so therefore I move to apologies, and I move from the chair that we accept the apology from Councillor Vandervis and an apology for early departure from Councillor Gary. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Mayhem. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Declare the motion's carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I don't think there's any changes to the agenda, so I move that we confirm the agenda without addition or alteration. All those in favour? Thank you, Councillor Barker. All those in favour? Aye. Any against? Motion carried. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded of the need to stand aside from decision making when a conflict arose between their role as an elected representative and any private or other external interests they might have. Are there any changes or updates? Councillor Eklund.
Madam Chair, I noticed that from yesterday, from this morning's report, meeting, my addition from yesterday had been added, but it's not on the one today. So if somebody could just note that it's Insulmax Insulation, I'm doing some part-time for them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other changes? With that, I would like to note that we amend the elected members' interest register, and I have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Barker. All those in favour? Aye. Against? I declare the motion is carried. Confirmation of minutes. I'd like to move from the chair that we confirm the minutes of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee meeting held on the 9th of May 2023 as a true and correct record. Second to Councillor Mayhem. Are there any questions or comments on that? There being none, I move that. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Part A reports, page 19, the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee Forward Work Programme. Invite Mr Logie to speak to the report, and Ms Graham. Is there anything you would like to add to the report, Mr Logie?
Probably just a follow-up from a previous meeting. There was some discussion around the presentation of the DCHL parent accounts, which I think came from Deputy Mayor Barker. So originally we had the date in for February, but given that the statutory timeframes for the annual reporting has changed, we've brought that back to the November meeting of the Finance and Council Control Organisation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr Logie? I've got one question in relation to the investment plan. And I note now that it's due now for August. It was originally going to be, I think, for June.
So I think there's been some developments in relation to the companies that we just want to maybe build into the investment plan before we present it to the council.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
This is possibly more a question for someone I see sitting behind you, but given the multi-talented Gemma Adams is leaving, will we be advertising for someone to replace that position?
I can answer that, but that is really operational, but the ad is in the market at the moment.
Any further questions? There being done, I'd like to move that we note the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee Forward Work Programme for June 2023. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Gilbert. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Item number 7, page 23, financial result for the period ended 31 May 2023. Mr Logie, do you have anything you'd like to speak to the report?
Probably just refer committee members to page 27 where we have the graphs. Probably the two to note, obviously operating cash flow is very close to budget, and CapEx, again, running ahead of budget consistent with previous months. It's come back a little bit, but the anticipation is that we'll end the year just over $200 million in terms of a capital program, which is well above what we've done in the past. Other than that, happy to take questions on the substantive report.
Are there any questions for Mr Logie? Mr Wiley? Councillor Wiley?
Thank you. Mr Logie, looking through, I saw a note about parking revenues. Items was page 2 of 8, where it talked about on-street and off-street parking revenue was unfavourable by 1.057 million due to lower than expected activity. Parking continues to be impacted by changing habits where people continue to work from home, along with some lost revenue due to road closures. My understanding there was still a strong demand for lease parking in actually a lot of the meter parking would be affected by the upgrade of George Street and surrounding works.
So in terms of the lease parking year to date is 35 unfavourable to budget, and that's primarily due to the removal of the Queen's Gardens, where we had parks previously, but that's now been taken over by the development of the ACC building. In terms of the casual parking, we're seeing shortfalls across all our facilities, so it's not just the on-street, it's actually the off-street car parks as well as the off-street buildings. The benchmark that we're looking back to, when we look at 2019, which was the last year that we probably had parking at its normal, we're about 500,000 below that, which again is an indication that people's habits have changed in terms of how they're parking. But certainly the closure of George Street and obviously Great King Street has impacted some of that revenue as well.
Deputy Mayor Barker.
I just have a follow-up question to that. Would you take into account the fact that we haven't had international or many domestic visitors in part of that explanation for less parking?
Yes, again, that could be a contributing factor.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, our the debt has steadily increased over the course of this year. But the question is, when are we likely to receive DIA confirmation of debt transfer with the Three Waters program? Do you know?
Chief, are you aware of the status of that? I haven't heard.
No, the discussions are still underway, but at this stage, the information we provided last time is still accurate. There is an expectation that the debt will transfer. It's just what we do with that accelerated program that is still to be decided.
And my question is, do we have a timeline for when DIA will confirm it?
No, and the new ledge came out on Friday, and staff are reviewing that, and that has some more detail around the transition provisions, but they haven't had time to fully review that yet because it only came out on Friday.
Councillor Ackland.
Yeah, and also further to that, if the government happen to change their mind about the taking over the water assets, then of course we don't get that money at all, do we?
As we discuss in deliberations, that's exactly right.
But then you still get to keep the assets.
And then we're going to fund the depreciation.
Well, but then the discussion for the council would be at what level you rate for water, and there's been commentary about how our water rate would need to be increased to cover the cost of the service.
I've got two questions. One is in relation to page 28. If we look at the where a net surplus is, well, a deficit, is if we took out depreciation, we're not that far off budget. And is that where you expect that we will land, bearing in mind we've only got a week to run of the year?
So yeah, if you take look at the variances, you've got depreciation at 22.1 million, and then you've got actually the interest. So remember there was an increase in our interest rate for the second half of the year, which is 2.2 million. That's your 24.4 million. Yeah. Obviously the Waipori Fund is doing relatively well, and if you compare it to the same period last year, we were at a deficit of 2.6 million. So again, that's contributing to our bottom line.
And in terms of our previous meeting when we resolved to increase the debt, are we needing to uplift all that debt that we approved?
No, so at this stage, the debt at the end of May, it's likely that we'll draw down a further 5 million, so we'll be under the original cap that was approved by Council. So that will flow through into the subsequent financial year.
That's excellent. Any further questions? Thank you. There being none, I'm happy to move that the committee notes the financial performance for the period ended 31 May 2023 and the financial position as that date. Do I have a second to Councillor Walker? Would anyone like to speak to that? There being no speakers, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Any against? Motion's carried. Item number 8, Dunedin City Holdings Limited Group update for the quarter ending 31 March 2023. I'd like to invite Mr Keith Cooper, the Chair of Dunedin City Holdings, to speak to the report. Thank you, Mr Cooper.
Thank you. Just by way of exception through the report that's been circulated, everything's on track, if not slightly ahead of last year, and certainly slightly ahead of budget, including Dunedin Airport, which is materially better than last year, which will assist in their revised dividend payment for the coming year. On positive notes, DRL also traded better than expected. Not that it's material, but at least it's the right way round. With the rest of the companies all in line with the exception of Delta, which we've previously discussed. And we've done a lot of work on Delta. This quarter's back in March, so some time ago. We're almost finished the year and the final quarter, and nothing's materially changing across the group. And there's some good work going on in Delta to improve their position going forward. That is reliant on renegotiating various contracts. Of specific note, since this date or up to this date, a combination of recent announcements around government reviewing the ETS scheme, that's created a level of uncertainty, and that it's certain there is uncertainty. So it's very much a watching brief now. We're reasonably well positioned. The underlying commentary still is the market's got to function, which means the price of the credits go up, but we've got to see under what structure and what model. We have had confirmation from the government that any land holdings that aren't planted would be safe in the current environment. So we're not going to be left stranded with unplanted land, which de-risks it to a degree. So I think that's about all on the specific companies. Overall, we're in line with our statement of intent performance measures, with the exception of Delta. And on the cash flows are all in line with projections and slightly ahead of projections, which is also a good positive to have. And finally, on the Treasury page, we're fully compliant with the policy. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Cooper? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cooper, on page 43, the section on Delta, it makes the comment there that improvement has been noted in terms of Delta, but progress is slow. And then it talks in the next point about the impact of staff availability, retention and recruitment issues. Could you speak more fully to those points, please?
Sorry, the challenges which we previously touched on is we still have a COVID hangover here, particularly in that business. Probably something to do with the number of people involved, what they do on a day-to-day basis, and we continue to see high levels of absenteeism, which comes at an underlying cost to the business. But the secondary part to that is it also means when we have to do work and we don't have our own staff, we have to outsource it, which means we lose the margin on that work. So that's the circular challenges we have on dealing with the people issues there.
And that's being felt in other sectors too. Do you see light at the end of the tunnel with that, though?
We're seeing improvements. The underlying ERP system is now starting to kick in as well, but I haven't got current data for absenteeism, but my sense is it has been improving slightly since March, given the results since March have shown some improvement.
And so the winter time kicking in with all of the illness around in the community, that hasn't impacted, you're saying, is that what you're...
Sorry, that's probably about to kick in if it's going to. Winter's always a challenging area, particularly across that workforce who's out and about in the type of weather conditions they are.
Appreciate the challenges, thanks.
I have a question on page 48 in regards to capital expenditure, which I noted at March was ahead of prior year, which is primarily for Aurora. Is that just a timing issue, or do you expect that by year end that you'll still be ahead?
There is an element of that which will put us ahead at year end. They have signalled, because some of the work streams have come forward, so there's a pattern emerging that they will be slightly ahead of where they're previously forecast, which will become apparent in the SOI process as well.
Thank you.
There is an element of, because of how the Aurora model works under the model, if they're spending more, they're actually improving their revenues because their revenues are based on what their investment is. So it's a circular positive.
I understand that. Any further questions for Mr. Cooper? There being none, thank you for your time today and thank you for the report. I will then move that the committee notes the Dunedin City Holdings Limited Group quarterly update for the period ended 31 March 2023. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Mayor Braddock. Would anybody like to speak to that? There being no speakers, I will put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Declare the motion is carried. Item 9, items for consideration by the Chair. Don't believe there are any of those. There being none, I will declare the meeting closed at 1:16. Thank you very much. A record. I didn't know I was having a record.